Imagine waking up at 3:42 a.m., your hands frozen around a brass pole, your lungs filled with soot, and your job, wait for it, is to keep the city from falling into chaos by lighting lamps. That's right, your entire existence depends on flames in glass globes. And guess what? You have to do it all while dodging horse dung, drunk aristocrats, and a fog thicker than a Dickens novel. Romantic, sure, if you enjoy bronchitis, broken shoes, and being yelled at by chimney sweeps. Welcome to the glamorous life of a Victorian lantern lighter. Bring your own matches, if you like historical misery delivered with charm and candlelight. Light that subscribe button, or don't. But we'll be standing in this damp alley until you do. Before we had electricity, before buttons turned into blinding ceiling LEDs, before lamps flickered on with a whisper of a voice command, there was fire, and fire needed a middleman. Enter the lamplighter. Not a wizard, not a priest, not a beloved local figure, just a sleep-deprived man with a 12-foot pole, a coat full of oil stains, and a daily rendezvous with open flame and pigeon droppings. You didn't apply to be a lamplighter because you wanted to. You applied because you didn't want to starve, and the rat catcher position was taken. The job was invented in the same way many public services are, through noble panic and aristocratic inconvenience. In the beginning, cities were pitch after sunset, not it's getting late dark. More like welcome to the abyss dark. This was especially inconvenient for rich folks who needed to get from the opera house to their brandy cabinet without falling into open sewage. So, by the 16th century, a few European cities decided to try oil lamps, not out of concern for public safety, mind you, but because people kept bumping into nobles, which was both rude and legally punishable. It started with torches on hooks, candles in glass bowls, and eventually, whale oil lanterns suspended over the middle of the street. Basically high-stakes fire juggling, and someone had to go out and light them every single night. Congratulations, that someone was you. But wait, before you romanticize this as some quaint Dickensian role full of charm and streetwise wisdom, let's clarify. Lamplighters weren't seen as heroic guardians of the night. They were more like municipal janitors with flammable responsibilities. You were barely paid, rarely thanked, and constantly blamed when some drunk banker tripped into a barrel because your lamp didn't burn bright enough, and the technology, laughably primitive. Those early lanterns were made of thin glass and thinner logic. You had to light them with a taper soaked in oil, balancing on ladders that creaked with every breath. If you were lucky, the lamp worked. If not, congratulations, you just reinvented the personal house fire. There's a lovely little legend that the first official lamplighter in London was actually a former soldier who found civilian life too quiet. So naturally, he chose the calming pastime of climbing slippery poles in the rain while holding fire. You know, for the serenity. By the 18th century, gas lamps came into fashion. Cities expanded, streets lengthened, and human labor, glorious, underpaid human labor, scaled to meet demand. Soon, there were whole fleets of lamplighters, hundreds, roaming the city like a synchronized ballet of municipal anxiety. You had to memorize your entire route, every corner, every lamp, every shortcut through that one terrifying alley that smells like dead eels and broken dreams, and timing was everything. Start too early, and you waste precious gas. Too late, and half the city is wandering blind into each other. Also, you were expected to relight any lamp that went out. Even at 3 a.m., even in sideways rain, even if a dog was biting your knee. Let's not forget the bureaucracy. Your route was logged, your lighting stick inspected. Your failure to ignite lamp number 43B, Upper Maypole South, could land you a fine, a demotion, or a particularly aggressive lecture from a supervisor named Gerald, who smells like varnish and disappointment. But the city didn't stop growing, neither did the lanterns. Soon you were lighting lamps perched 2 stories high, dangling from wrought iron brackets, attached to buildings made by people who clearly hated humanity. If your pole wasn't long enough, too bad. Stretch dot. And then, of course, came the children. Yes, children. See, lamplighters didn't exactly command universal respect. On the contrary, you were often the target of pranks, jeers, and the occasional brick. One documented incident from 1842 involved a group of children who followed a lamplighter through London, extinguishing every lamp he lit with sticks, hats, and sheer spite. They called it reverse lighting. He called it Tuesday. One particularly vindictive child, name unknown, probably now a real estate lawyer, once stole a lamplighter's taper stick mid-shift. The lighter had to finish his route with a single candle stub and a progressively worsening sense of dread. That's the thing about the job. You're always one prank away from total darkness, but lamplighting persisted. For centuries, despite storms, strikes, and the minor inconvenience of entire city blocks catching fire, it endured. Why? Because people are afraid of the dark. And when people are afraid of something, they'll pay someone else the bare minimum to deal with it. So there you were, every evening, quietly sparking the edges of the city awake, one flame at a time. No fanfare, no applause, just the satisfying pop of ignition and the slow hiss of gas catching flame. And maybe, if you were lucky, a passing nod from a baker on his way home. Most nights, though, just silence and soot, and it all started because someone, somewhere, got tired of tripping over a carriage wheel in the dark and said, "You know what this city needs? A guy with a stick." Let that sink in. So, you've landed the job. The city has entrusted you with the sacred duty of preventing massed faceplants after sunset. All that remains is for them to outfit you like a second-rate chimney sweep and toss you into the abyss. First things first, the cloak. Oh yes, the signature lamplighter's cloak. A long, heavy, wool monstrosity that traps heat in the summer, leaks rain in the winter, and smells vaguely of boiled leather and unresolved trauma. Think of it as a wearable damp sponge with buttons. Why wool? Because wool doesn't burn as easily as, say, cotton, which is important when your job is to walk around carrying fire, which also means it smolders instead. You haven't lived until you've walked 4 blocks before realizing your sleeve is politely on fire. Next, the cap. It's not stylish. It's not even warm. It's mostly just there to prevent pigeon gifts from landing directly in your hair. Typically made of felt, or whatever fabric the quartermaster could scavenge from a dead tailor. The lamplighter's cap did nothing to protect you from wind, sleet, or judgmental stares from passing clergymen. But it marked you. That cap said, "Yes, I am here to light the world. And yes, I am also deeply underpaid." Now, let's talk about your most essential piece of equipment, the pole. Technically called a lighting staff, but let's not pretend it isn't just a glorified stick with attachments. One end has a wick holder to spark the gas jets. The other sometimes has a hook to adjust the lamp windows, or in worse neighborhoods, to fight off a raccoon. It's usually about 8 to 12 feet long, which means you now have the privilege of carrying a cumbersome metal javelin through narrow, cobbled alleyways every single night. Oh, and if you think it's stored neatly at the station for easy access, no, you carry it with you, everywhere. Imagine walking several miles with an awkward, rattling lance while dodging barrow boys, sewage carts, and couples making poor decisions in doorways. If you're lucky, you get gloves. Not nice gloves, just gloves, often fingerless, sometimes made from stitched scraps of sheep intestine. They don't keep your hands warm, but they do prevent your skin from blistering when you inevitably grab the metal end of your pole after it's been sitting in flame for 10 minutes. And then there's the key. Each lamplighter was issued a small iron key to unlock the access panels of the lamp housings. Lose it, you're walking back to the depot. Break it, you're prying open the panel with a butter knife and your last ounce of dignity. Now, let's address the boots. Oh, the boots. Imagine if depression could be shaped into footwear. Heavy, misshapen, perpetually damp Victorian lamplighter boots were often repurposed from discarded military surplus. The soles were made of leather or poorly tacked hobnails, which meant you slipped constantly, especially when trying to look heroic in front of a passing milkmaid. Worst of all, they squeaked loudly. Nothing like trying to embody the silent poetry of nightfall while your left boot honks with every step like a constipated duck. And we haven't even discussed the smell. By the end of your shift, you reek like a tavern floor on Guy Fawkes night. The oil clings to your cloak. The soot embeds in your skin. Your hair smells like burnt string and antique regret. If you try to bathe, and that's a big if, considering water was often more bacteria than liquid, it takes 3 rinses just to get your fingernails back to their original color, which was still mostly gray. But perhaps the most soul-crushing part of the uniform isn't the stink, the squelch, or the slow creep of mildew into your bones. It's the fact that the outfit is intentionally designed to make you invisible. You are, by trade, the light bringer. You mark the city's transition from day to night. You are the guardian of visibility. And yet no one is meant to look at you. The cloak blends with the shadows. The cap hides your face. The boots say, "Ignore me. I am not worthy of narrative closure." And after a few years in this job, you start to feel it. That sense that you've become a walking silhouette. That your only identity is the faint hiss of ignition and the shadow you leave behind as the city glows without ever knowing your name. Can you still call yourself visible when your job is to light the street, but no one remembers who lit it? You might meet someone in the market who walks past the same glowing lamps you lit the night before, and they'll say, "The city feels magical lately." And you'll nod, knowing that magical means you nearly froze your thumbs off trying to fix a broken igniter in front of a bakery, where the owner won't even let you use the privy. There's an existential weirdness to being a lamplighter. You're essential, but unseen. Necessary, but disposable. You're not quite public servant, not quite tradesman, more like a walking anachronism whose entire wardrobe says, "I'm here to help, but also, please don't speak to me." And that cloak, you'll wear it until the buttons fall off or a dog mistakes you for a chew toy. You'll fix it with bits of wire. You'll wrap your boots in cloth. You'll patch your gloves with string. And eventually, the uniform becomes a second skin. Not just what you wear, but who you are. A soot-streaked, lantern-bearing whisper in the night until, of course, your pole breaks mid-light, your key jams in the lock, and someone shouts from a window, "Oi, lamp's still out, ya lazy bastard." Then you're not a romantic figure of twilight serenity. You're just a man standing in a puddle, holding a useless stick, wondering how long it takes for oil to soak through wool. If you've ever watched a Victorian period drama and thought, wow, this fog really sets the mood, then congratulations, you've been emotionally manipulated by weather, because, for the lamplighter, that aesthetic mist wasn't romantic, it was a monster. A creeping, choking, yellow-green beast that ate your vision, clawed at your lungs, and laughed in your face while you fumbled for a gas jet. This wasn't just a bit of fog. This was London's infamous pea souper, a weather phenomenon so dense, so gelatinous, it could arguably be served in a bowl, formed from the perfect cocktail of coal smoke, industrial filth, and unregulated chimney ambition. This fog didn't drift, it sat, it slithered. It built up in alleyways like a sentient pudding. Visibility, roughly 3 feet on a good day, on a bad day. You could barely see the tip of your lighting pole, let alone where to stick it. And you were expected to work in this. Your shift starts just before dusk. You're already tired, already damp, and the fog has rolled in early like an unwanted relative who critiques your posture. Your cloak is wet before the first lamp, and your glasses, if you can afford them, are immediately rendered useless by the sticky film of industrial despair. Lighting lamps in a fog bank is like trying to thread a needle while blindfolded and being heckled by chimney sweeps. You stagger down the lane, holding your pole like a lost jouster, squinting at every vague outline and praying it's a lamp and not an unusually tall child. Spoiler, sometimes it is. And it wasn't just London. Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow. Anywhere with factories and bad life choices had its share of toxic mist. The air didn't just hang heavy, it actively betrayed you. Your lungs burned, your eyes watered, and if you lit a match too close to your face, the sulfur would backfire and leave you smelling like an overcooked egg for days. Oh, and the danger. Let's not understate it. More than a few lamps vanished into the fog and found themselves in entirely different neighborhoods. One particularly unlucky chap, according to half-trusted pub lore, began his route in Stark, got turned around near the river, and re-emerged 3 days later, lighting lamps in Liverpool. He wasn't fired, he was promoted. Apparently, if you can accidentally migrate across counties while still finishing your route, your upper management material, and that wasn't even the worst of it. Because here's the thing, people trusted the lamps. They assumed that if a street was lit, it was safe. They assumed that if you were seen lighting a lamp, you knew what you were doing. But in the fog, you were guessing. Every flame was a gamble. Did you light the right post? Is this your lamp or someone else's? Are you even on the right street? There's a deeply existential dread in realizing you may have just illuminated a random barn while the butcher's district remains pitch black behind you. Sometimes the fog would lift just enough to reveal the mistake. Other times, it wouldn't, and the residents of Fetter Lane would spend the night in total darkness because you accidentally double-lit the same lamp 3 times on Bishopsgate. Oops, but let's take a breath here. Let's slow down, breathe. That in no, actually don't. Not unless you want a coughing fit and a light case of existential collapse. That's coal dust. That's soot. That's an entire day's worth of Victorian economy cooked into microscopic filth and served directly to your lungs. And you weren't the only one choking on it. Animals wandered blindly through the fog, bumping into lampposts and knocking them over. Horses bolted, carriages crashed, and people mistook canal edges for doorways. There's a recorded case of a banker walking off a bridge because he mistook a gaslight's reflection in the water for a second street lamp. Nature, in her infinite Grace gave us sunsets. The Victorians gave us atmospheric suicide. So how did you cope? Well, you developed tricks. You learned to count paces between lamps. You memorized the smell of specific gutters. You used landmarks, the bakery that always smells like overdone rye, the building with the slightly aggressive gargoyle, the alley where someone's always playing violin badly and crying at the same time. Eventually, you adapted, because you had to, and because no one else was coming to save you from it. Of course, on the rare day when the fog didn't roll in, when the sky held just enough clarity to see 2 lamps ahead, it felt like magic. You'd catch a glimpse of the stars, feel a breeze that didn't carry soot, and almost believe that the city was beautiful. But mostly, it was fog. And the thing about fog is this: it doesn't just blind you, it humbles you. It reminds you that no matter how many lamps you light, you're still one misplaced footstep away from falling into a horse trough and losing your pole to a feral dog. So you trudge forward, one light at a time, into a world that refuses to show itself, because that's the job, because someone has to do it, and because no one wants to admit that without you. They're just another figure lost in the mist. Welcome to the graveyard shift, Victorian edition. While respectable citizens are tucking into their eider-down beds, dreaming of empire and overboiled cabbage, you're out here lighting gas lamps in alleys that smell like regret and expired mutton. You're not so much on duty as you are the only warm-blooded mammal voluntarily upright in this city right now. Well, you and the rats. You start your shift just as the last market stall packs up and the public drunks begin their nightly migration. The sky is an overcast bruise, tinged orange with industrial guilt, and your only companion is the long, thin pole in your hand, a symbol of dignity, purpose, and, let's be honest, weaponized inconvenience. As you begin your route, the city changes. During daylight, it's bustling, frantic, noisy. At night, it becomes something else. A maze of whispers and flickering gaslight, where shadows stretch longer than the alleyways they cling to. It's peaceful, in a vaguely threatening way, like a cat that hasn't decided whether to purr or maul. This is the lamplighter's domain. You don't walk these streets. You haunt them. Every night follows the same rhythm. You light a lamp, step back, make sure it takes, move on, repeat hundreds of times. You're a one-person procession, part ritual, part grunt work. The only music, the soft pop of ignition and the wet slap of your boots in puddles you pretend aren't alive, but the real companions, the ones who never miss a shift. The rats. Victorian cities were rat wonderlands, sewers that doubled as expressways, overflowing trash heaps, open gutters lovingly referred to as drainage solutions, and where there's waste, there's whiskers. By the time you reach your third lamppost, you've already made eye contact with at least 4 rodents, 3 of whom are dragging a pigeon, and the 4th is inexplicably wearing what looks like half a doll's hat. You try to ignore them, pretend you're above all that, but there's a strange, unspoken camaraderie. You're both creatures of the night, both ignored, both drawn to the same flicker of gaslight and the faint hope of warmth. Sometimes you see them fight over crusts, over territory, over nothing. It's a reminder that, despite your job title, you're not the most tenacious life form on this shift. The rats don't clock in, don't need gloves, and if they get a limb caught in a trap, they chew it off and move on. You stub a toe on a cobblestone and limp dramatically for the next 5 hours. milking the tragedy like a Shakespearean understudy. But back to the job. Each street is a tiny war zone. You have to find the lamp, open the panel, spark the jet, then seal it up again without burning yourself, dropping your key, or accidentally igniting a nearby mustache. And you have to do it quickly, not because anyone's timing you, but because the less time you spend standing still in this godforsaken fog, the better. You learn to be efficient. Lamp, step, like a monk reciting prayers with fire. Your pole becomes an extension of your arm. You can judge wind direction just by how the flame curls. You develop an instinct for faulty jets, broken panels, and the precise moment a rivet will betray you. Still, accidents happen. You've had flames gutter out in your face. Startled, cats leap from rooftops onto your back. And once, and you don't talk about this much, a bat flew directly into your mouth. So yeah, breathe that in, damp coal fog and boiled cabbage. Smells like civilization, and yet there's something hypnotic about it all. The stillness, the rhythm, the way the lamplight cuts a clean line through the fog, like a knife through stew. Sometimes when you pause to catch your breath, you look back at the road behind you, a glowing path through darkness, and you feel something not quite. Pride, not quite melancholy, just presence. You are here, you are real. You are the reason this street isn't swallowed whole. That feeling doesn't last, inevitably. You'll reach a stretch of road where the lamps are jammed. You'll fumble with keys, curse under your breath, and probably get startled by a noise that turns out to be a rat dragging an apple core, again, or worse. A drunk who mistakes you for a lamppost and tries to relieve himself on your boots. True story. Happened to more than one poor soul. You develop fast reflexes. You learn to navigate all of it. The rats, the dark, the cold. And beneath the soot and cynicism, there's a strange poetry to your work. The idea that each night you push back against oblivion, one flicker at a time. Of course, no one sees it that way. They just expect the lights to be on, as if they appear magically at sunset, summoned by some bureaucratic incantation. No one imagines the tired, shivering figure who made it happen, who stood in ankle-deep filth, chased off a possum and lit the lamp anyway. But you know, and the rats, they probably know too. They watch from the shadows, beady eyes reflecting your flame, and nod in silent recognition. Or maybe they're just wondering if you've got bread. You'd think that light, being a universal necessity like air or mildly condescending weather, would be distributed evenly. After all, a street is a street, and darkness is darkness, regardless of how many waistcoats the locals own. But no, this is Victorian Britain. And even the gas lamps had a social ladder. The basic rule: the richer your street, the brighter your night. Let's say you're assigned to Mayfair. You'll find yourself lighting ornate lamps on every corner, polished by someone with a title like municipal glass assistant, glowing with a generous hiss of gas that practically says, hello. Old sport, don't trip on the curb. These are the lamps with brass fittings, engraved poles, and little hats to keep the soot off. They're dusted daily. Sometimes they even smell faintly of imported cinnamon. You almost feel guilty touching them with your soot-covered gloves. Then there's WHITECHAPEL, same job, different planet. The lamps here are sparse, half-choked with rust, and so dim you wonder if they're powered by spite. You'll reach for the gas valve and realize someone's stolen it, again, or it was never installed to begin with. Or the last lighter simply skipped this street out of self-preservation. Lighting these lamps feels like trying to comfort a dying cat. They sputter, they flicker, they wheeze out a faint glow. More of a suggestion than actual illumination. One strong breeze and the streets plunged back into prehistory. If you're lucky, the rats will guide you, and the residents. They notice, they always notice. You'll be lighting lamps in a working-class neighborhood, dodging puddles and suspicious stares when someone shouts from a window, "Oi, why's Bond Street got lights and we don't?" It's a fair question, and the answer, though you'd never say it aloud, is brutally simple. Bond Street pays taxes, Whitechapel pays in boils, and disappointment. The city's lighting budget wasn't about equality, it was about appearances. Aristocrats wanted their streets to look safe, well lit for their evening promenades and dramatic midnight duels. Poorer districts, less concern. Fewer lights meant fewer witnesses. It also meant that by the time someone stumbled upon your body, the rat had already written their will. Some streets only had lamps on the main corners, leaving long stretches of alley in pitch black. Others had one solitary lamp, miles from any building installed, because a nobleman's horse once got startled there. That's right, some neighborhoods got gaslighted for horses before humans. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was survival. In upper-class areas, well-lit streets meant fewer accidents, fewer muggings, fewer unfortunate encounters with open sewer grates. In the slums, the darkness wasn't just unpleasant, it was a predator. Every unlit corner became a haven for thieves, drunks, and people with very specific and alarming knives. And yet, here you are, lamplighting your way across both worlds. You start your night on a cobbled avenue with gold-trimmed posts, where butlers tip their hats at you and gas pressure is so strong the lamps practically light themselves. An hour later, you're elbowed in rusted iron trying to coax a dying flame out of a pipe that hisses like it resents being born. The difference is obscene, and somehow invisible, because no one questions why the nice parts of town glow like fairy tales while the poor parts feel like haunted basements. It's just the way it is. The city doesn't light what it doesn't want seen, and that includes you. You notice things, too. The way kids in wealthier districts wave at you, call you sir, or offer scraps from their nanny's second basket. In the slums, they either ignore you or ask how flammable your pole is. You see the woman in the silk dress who nods at you from a safe, candlelit balcony, and the man in rags who watches you from a cellar with a stare that says, "I know. This light won't stop them." You don't light every street equally, and eventually that eats at you. Because your job is to bring light, but sometimes the city decides who deserves it. There was a story, one the older lamplighters told, of a lighter named Felix who used to smuggle extra wicks and oil into the poorest neighborhoods. He'd light unauthorized lamps, ones the city had long abandoned. For weeks, that stretch of alley stayed miraculously bright. People whispered about it. Felix's flame, they called it. Then one night, the lamps stayed dark. Felix's pole was found snapped in half beside a gutter. No one saw anything, of course. That's the thing about Victorian light. It was never just light. It was policy. It was class warfare with a flickering edge. And you, with your cloak and your pole and your city-assigned route, were both pawn and accomplice. By the time you finish your shift, your hands are blackened, your lungs taste like coal, and the street behind you is unevenly lit like a badly copied sketch. The rich sleep easy in their brightness. The poor wrap themselves in shadow, and you disappear back into it, Because even when you illuminate the city, no one thinks to ask who lit the lamp in the dark part of town, or why it took so long to get there. For most workers, the enemies of productivity are things like boredom, laziness, or a poorly timed snack break. For a lamplighter in Victorian Britain, your enemies are wind, rain, and a boy named Archie with a slingshot and too much free time. Let's start with the weather, the original workplace hazard. Unlike modern jobs, where you can call in sick because it's looking a bit gloomy, lamplighters didn't have that luxury. Rain, you go. Wind, you go. Biblical hailstorm, raining down chunks of frozen divine punishment. Still going. Why? Because the darkness doesn't care if your socks are wet and your will to live is in critical condition. Rain was the most obvious villain. It didn't just make everything miserable, it actively sabotaged your flame. You'd carefully strike your taper, get that delicate blue tongue of fire glowing, reach it up toward the lamp jet, and a single fat raindrop would sizzle it into oblivion. Over and over and over. You'd try to shield it with your body, hunched like a depressed flamingo, but the angle never worked. The rain always found you. It always won. And if your wick got too soaked, congratulations, you now have to re-oil it mid-street in the dark, using your one mostly clean rag that currently smells like wet squirrel. But rain, for all its soaked indignities, was still less treacherous than the wind. Our wind, nature's heckler. It didn't just blow out your flame. No, that would be too kind. Wind would wait until the exact moment your taper sparked to life, then gust just hard enough to blow soot directly into your eyes. Or it would rattle the lamppost violently while you were balancing your pole, making you look like a drunken fencing instructor. Some gusts were subtle, others tried to yeet you into the Thames. All were personal. You learned tricks. How to crouch against the post, how to light the lee side first, how to mutter unprintable curses at a volume only the wind could hear. But the wind didn't care. The wind just wanted to see you cry. Then there was snow. You'd think snow might be pretty gently falling flakes, a soft hush over the city. That's what the poets say. The reality. You're slipping on ice while carrying a flaming stick, trying not to break your hip in front of a startled goat. Snow coated the lamp panels, clogged the jets, froze the oil, and turned every step into a potential comedy death trap. One false move and you're face down in a snowbank. Poles still upright like a tragic flag of defeat. But if you thought nature was cruel, just wait until you met teenage boys. There was something about lamplighters that drew the ire of young delinquents, like moths to, well, you. Maybe it was the uniform. Maybe it was the pole. Maybe it was because your job involved a predictable route and zero backup. Whatever the reason, you became a mobile target. Rowdy teenagers would follow you down the street, mimicking your every movement. Ooh, look at me, I'm Mr. Firestick, I light the moon. Some would toss pebbles at your hat. Others, the more ambitious ones, tried to douse your flame with makeshift squirt guns made from pig bladders. Yes, really. And then there was Archie. Every lamplighter had an Archie. The name varied, could have been Billy, Tom, or Little Crankshaft Joe, but the energy was the same. A local menace, unsupervised, sticky hands, bright eyes full of malice. Archie lived to ruin your night. He knew your route better than you did. He'd race ahead, extinguish freshly lit lamps, or worse, grease the post handles so your gloves slid right off. Once, he replaced the wick in lamp number 32 with a worm. Archie didn't hate you. He just found your suffering deeply entertaining, and, in a way, it was mutual. You began to look forward to the battle, a cat-and-mouse game of scorched dignity. He made you sharper, or more paranoid. Hard to say. Still, for every prankster and puddle, you carried on, because you had to. The city needed its light, even if it didn't always want it, even if it tried, actively, to make sure it didn't happen. Sometimes, the enemy wasn't outside. It was your equipment, a loose valve, a faulty jet, a wick that refused to hold flame. The worst, when your final lamp, your very last of the night, just refused. You'd be standing there, pole held high, taper lit, gas hissing. Gently and nothing. The flame wouldn't catch. You try again and again. Your arm starts to cramp. Your back tightens. You feel the stares of passing strangers, judgmental cats, maybe even Archie lurking somewhere, giggling, and just when you're about to snap, to hurl your lighting pole into the gutter and declare yourself spiritually extinct, you hear, "It a cough, not yours." Not Archie's, the inspector, yes. That one, clipboard in hand. Bowler hat tilted just so. He's here to observe, and your lamp isn't lit. Your pulse races, your taper flares, then dies. The wind, sensing its cue, gives a triumphant gust. The inspector clears his throat again. You try not to cry. Eventually, miraculously, the flame catches the lamp, flickers to life. The inspector grunts, makes a note, walks on. You exhale, heart thudding. Another shift survived. Another round of enemies defeated, or at least endured. And as you trudge away, boots squelching, cloak dripping, you glance over your shoulder, just in time to see Archie blow a raspberry and vanish into the fog. Don't you know what makes any job more exciting? Explosions. Especially when they're spontaneous, unannounced, and directly related to your primary tool of employment. Welcome to the age of gaslight, the Victorian equivalent of installing a smart home system powered entirely by napalm. And good intentions. Before gas, lamp lighting was a relatively calm affair. Risky, yes. You were playing with fire in long woolen sleeves, but manageable. You had oil, a wick, and whatever emotional stability you brought with you from childhood. Then came the 19th century's favorite drug, innovation. Suddenly, gas was everywhere. It was in the lamps. It was in the pipes. It was in the air you were breathing. Progress had arrived, and it smelled faintly of danger and roasted street cat. The idea was simple. Instead of lighting individual oil lamps, cities could install gas pipes that delivered a steady flow of flammable vapor to lamps all over town. Just a little twist. Of the valve, a spark, and boom, light. Clean, steady, convenient. Except when it wasn't, which was. Often the gas pipes were old, or hastily installed, or both. They cracked, they leaked. They hissed ominously like a Victorian librarian with asthma. You'd walk up to a lamp, reach for your taper, and pause, because the air smelled wrong. Too sweet, too sharp. Like someone had bottled regret and let it ferment underground. You hesitated. You lit the lamp anyway, and sometimes nothing happened. Other times, boom. Not the Hollywood-style fireball across the sky boom. More like a hump followed by a puff of soot, and your eyebrows retreating to your hat. Lamps would pop. Glass would shatter. Occasionally, the entire post would rattle violently, scaring the daylights out of passing dogs and causing you to reevaluate your career choices in real time. But the real fun came from the mains. These were the large, underground gas pipes that fed entire neighborhoods. If one cracked, and they did, constantly, the gas would leak into nearby soil, cellars, or, in at least one unfortunate case, a bakery. All it took was a single flame, a poorly struck match, or someone lighting a pipe a little too enthusiastically, and the ground would erupt. One lamplighter, name lost to history, but surely remembered in legend, let a post on Fleet Street, and promptly launched himself 6 feet backward when the lamp turned into a brief, glorious geyser of fire. He survived, slightly toasted, and later claimed he saw God, and she was holding a wrench. But the thing about danger is that people normalize it. After a few near misses, you stop flinching. The explosions become part of the job. You learn to read the signs, the metallic temps in the air, the tiny delay before ignition, the way the flame curls sideways, like it's bracing for impact. You develop instincts, you gain wisdom, you also lose most of the hair on your knuckles. And yet, gaslighting was progress. It made cities brighter, safer eventually, and weirdly more romantic. Gaslight turned London from a murky sprawl into a glittering metropolis, at least from a distance. Visitors marveled at the soft glow, the flickering ambience, the way the light danced on wet cobblestones like a music box set on fire. No one ever thought about who had to light all those gas jets, or how many of them went boom on an average Tuesday. Public sentiment was mixed. People loved the light, but hated the risk. If a lamp exploded, it was obviously your fault. If it didn't light, also your fault. If it overlit, flaring like a solar flare and blinding half a block, guess what? Still your fault. You weren't just a lamplighter anymore. You were the scapegoat for every unpredictable combustion within a 5-mile radius. City officials were no help. They issued memos like use caution around suspicious lamps and report signs of instability. But when the gas company was owned by the cousin of a mayor's cousin, reports tended to vanish into bureaucratic fog. So you made do. You modified your pole, carried extra wicks, kept a handkerchief soaked in vinegar to clear the gas, which mostly just made you smell like a salad and feel slightly dizzy. Some lamplighters wore thick goggles, not issued of course, bought with personal wages. You had to protect your assets, eyes, fingers, future ability to make toast without shaking. But despite all that, there was something almost magical about gaslight, if you could ignore the smell of leaking methane, and the occasional surprise explosion. The way it softened the city's harsh edges, the way it lingered in windows and pooled in doorways, turning every evening into a living painting. You'd stand at the edge of your route, watching the lamps come alive one by one, like stars falling into place, the city glowing not from the sun, but from you. Your work, your fire, and just when you're feeling sentimental, the wind shifts, a hiss, a spark, a little pop, you flinch. Flame dances up the post, then steadies. No explosion, not tonight. You exhale, move to the next dot, and behind you, a child whispers to his mother, "Look, Mum, the lamps light themselves." Of course they do. You may imagine the life of a lamplighter as a solitary pilgrimage through damp streets and existential dread, and you'd mostly be right. But even the loneliest professions attract a certain tribe. And down in the soot-stained trenches of Victorian night work, there was, against all odds, camaraderie. Not formal, of course. There were no lamplighter lodges, no exclusive clubs with embossed invitations and complimentary brandy. But there was the morning handoff at the depot, the grunted greetings, The nods that meant my pole snapped last night. Or don't go near lamp number 14. There's something nesting in it. Every shift began the same way. You arrived half asleep, cloaked in yesterday's soot, boots still damp from last night's sewer surprise. You checked the assignment board, a chalk-smudged relic that hadn't been cleaned since gaslight was invented, and hoped your route didn't include Cow Lane. No one wants Cow Lane. No one deserves Cow Lane. And then, slowly, the others arrived. The crew. First came Barry. No one knew his last name. He was always barefoot. Said boots were bourgeois. His feet were like hooves, impervious to cobbles, glass, or judgment. Barry claimed to have once lit 50 lamps in 20 minutes during a storm while being chased by a goose. No one doubted it. His beard housed its own microclimate. Then there was Gin Lizzie. Not her real name, obviously, but earned. Lizzie could drink any man under the table, recite the gas codes by heart, and once relit a blocked jet using nothing but her breath and sheer contempt. She smelled like turpentine and defiance. Her laugh, a weapon of mass demoralization, and finally, Sir Light's dash a dash lot. Again, not knighted, unless sarcasm now issued titles. Real name, Reggie, former schoolteacher turned lamplighter after an incident involving chalk and unresolved rage. Reggie insisted on calling his pole Excalibur and wore a monocle despite being aggressively nearsighted. He once tried to duel a malfunctioning lamp. The lamp won. These were your people, your mismatched soot-smeared, perpetually underpaid people. There was something about the job that forged bonds in the bleakest, most ridiculous ways. You knew each other's roots. You warned about bad valves and drunk postmen. You shared wick oil, rags, and stories that couldn't possibly be true, but were too good to fact-check. You didn't talk about feelings. That was too modern, too soft, but you knew when someone was off. When Barry stopped humming, when Lizzie arrived sober, when Reggie muttered to his pole a little more aggressively than usual, the city above you, the one that dined on roast pheasant and read aloud, by firelight never saw you, but you saw each other, in the quiet corners, in the shared silences, in the way you all laughed a bit too hard when Archie the neighborhood menace slipped in horse dung after blowing out a lamp you'd just lit. And when someone didn't show up for their shift, you noticed. You always noticed. There was the time. Barney, the quiet one with the limp, missed 2 days. He'd fallen from a post near the docks, landed wrong, broke something internal. By the time anyone found him, he'd crawled halfway home and collapsed beside lamp number 83. The gaslight company didn't send flowers. They deducted his remaining wages for the cost of the damaged post. The crew pooled their coin, paid for his burial, drank in his honor until sunrise. You didn't talk about it much after that. Just made sure lamp number 83 was always lit, a little brighter. Still watching, then you know what to do. Light up that button so we can keep roasting history, one grimy job at a time. Back on the streets, you might not see your crew during the shift. Routes were solitary, but you felt them. You saw their work. The signature way Barry looped his wick, the way Lizzie left small chalk X's on lamps that hissed too loud, Reggie's habit of humming God Save the Queen while adjusting jet flow, as if national pride would keep him from Comgust, and in the morning, if you crossed paths again, it wasn't fanfare or celebration. Just a nod, a shared look that said, still alive, and the grunt that meant, barely. Sometimes you met others too, sweepers, night watchmen, the occasional constable pretending not to nap. But lamplighters were their own species, somewhere between ghost and grunt, urban legend and liability. You might not write each other letters, or remember birthdays, but if you spotted another lighter, soaked to the bone, trying to relight a stubborn post with fingers that barely moved, you didn't walk by. You stopped, you helped, you grumbled the whole time. But you helped, because in a job where the only recognition was not being yelled at, the only applause came from those who knew exactly what it cost to keep the lamps glowing. At the end of the day, or rather, night, you weren't just lighting the city, you were lighting each other's paths, even if you never said it aloud. Not every night was a Dickensian disaster. Occasionally, the fog lifted, the wind died down, and the city, so often defined by grime and groaning, took a breath. And in those moments, rare as they were, being a lamplighter didn't just feel tolerable. It felt almost beautiful. It always started the same way. The air was clearer than usual, the lamps lit easily, and the cobblestones didn't actively try to kill you. No howling children, no rain crawling down your spine, just the soft shuffle of your boots, the quiet pop of gas catching flame, and a kind of hush that felt deeper than silence. You could actually hear your own heartbeat, or maybe that was just your knees, protesting the 6th hour of walking. Whatever it was yours. These were the nights when you paused mid-taper, still flickering, and looked up. And there they were, stars. Not many. London was never generous with them. But even a few was enough. Tiny pinpricks of light, unbothered by smoke or soot, hanging there like a promise. You could name them if you wanted. You could whisper to them. You could pretend they were watching. And in that moment, you weren't just some cloaked figure. With a pole, you were a thread between earth and sky, the only person awake in a city of sleepwalkers, keeper of the flame, steward of the stars. Okay, maybe that's dramatic, but when you spend most nights ankle-deep in rat water, you're allowed to romanticize a little. The solitude was part of the job description, unofficially. Most people couldn't handle it. They needed chatter, company, distraction. You had routine. You had the lamps and the city, so loud, so frantic by day, transformed at night into a creature you could actually understand. A city breathing, slowly, dreaming. There's a specific kind of peace that comes from being the only human figure moving through streets designed to forget you. No carriages, no shouting, just the occasional sigh of wind or distant church bell. You become part of the background, less a person, more a function, like the lamps themselves, quietly glowing, unnoticed, indispensable. It's in those hours between midnight and dawn that you think the clearest. You remember things, a face you haven't seen in years, a promise you made, the way your mother used to hum when she folded linen. You hear your own thoughts again, not the ones filled with soot and utility bills, but the ones you buried in the noise of surviving. Sometimes you see others, too, other wanderers of the dark, a milkman starting early, a nurse walking home, a man too drunk to remember where he's going. You nod to each other, silently acknowledging the sacred brotherhood of the unsaved. No words needed, just the flicker of recognition. And then there's the cats. No one tells you this, but lamplighters develop a strange rapport with the city's feline population. Not pets, not ferals, just cats, the in-betweeners. They follow you for a block, rub against your leg, perch on stoops, and watch you work with eyes that seem older than the buildings. They don't judge, they just are. like you. You find your rhythm. Lamp, step, a dance of flame and footfall, the occasional creak of a gas jet, the occasional sigh of your knees. But the movement is meditative, repetitive, calming, like prayer with less guilt and more matches. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a route along the river. That's where the silence is thickest. You light a lamp and see its reflection ripple across the water like a ghost trying to remember itself. The Thames isn't pretty, not by any stretch, but in that moment, with the city behind you and the river ahead, it almost feels holy. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you. For all the grime and danger and thanklessness, there are nights, tiny, glimmering nights, where being a lamplighter feels like touching something sacred. You're not just lighting streets. You're maintaining the fragile thread between chaos and calm, between sleep and fear, between the dark and whatever comes after dot. Sometimes you finish your route and don't want to go home. You linger, walk a few extra blocks, light a lamp that isn't on your list, not for duty, for something else, habit, reverence, a quiet sort of love. There's an alley in Spitalfields, narrow, crooked, always drafty. But when the wind is still and the lamps are lit just right, the walls glow amber and the cobbles shine like varnished bone. No one ever sees it like you do, not the same way, not at that hour, not with that silence. You pause there sometimes, just to stand, to listen, to be dot sometimes. The only thing more comforting than light is the quiet. Here's the paradox of lamplighting. You are absolutely essential until something goes wrong. Then you're a nuisance, a suspect, or just a conveniently flammable disappointment to the public. Lamplighters occupy a strange space. You're everywhere, but invisible, respected in theory, tolerated in practice, blamed on instinct. One night, you're a humble guardian of the streets. The next, you're the reason old Mrs. Farnsworth tripped over a cobblestone and sprained her dignity. It starts with expectations, wild, conflicting ones. First, you're expected to be punctual. The lamps must be lit precisely when the sun dips behind. The rooftops not a minute later. If you're early, you're wasting gas. If you're late, you're accused of conspiring with burglars. There is no winning, only flickering toleration. Then there's the matter of brightness. Some folks want a soft glow, romantic, cozy, flattering to the complexion. Others demand industrial-grade luminosity that could sear retinas and startle livestock. If the lamp is too dim, you're slacking. Too bright, you're waking the baby. A literal quote from a man who once threw a shoe at a lamppost and blamed it on his infant's insomnia. Let's not forget positioning. If the light shines too directly into someone's window, especially if that someone is wealthy and fond of dramatic curtain gestures, prepare for a letter. Or worse, a personal complaint shouted from a second-story balcony in a silk robe. It's like living in a theater. One man bellowed at you once, as if you personally choreographed the sunlight dot. And yet, when things go right, nothing, you light every lamp on time, in the rain, with frozen fingers, and not a word, not even a nod. The only time you hear from the public is when something goes wrong. Then the complaints arrive like rats on bread night. One evening, you miss a lamp. Just one. You were 5 hours into your route. Your taper had snapped, and the wind was howling like a widow at a séance. The lamp refused to light. You moved on. The next morning, chaos, apparently. Someone slipped on a curb, claimed it was too dark, filed a formal grievance. The city summoned you, as if you'd set out to sabotage the empire with a single mist flicker. You tried to explain the wind, the faulty jet, your lack of superhuman weather control. They nodded, took notes, gave you a warning. Of course, it wasn't always scorn. Occasionally, you got a thank you, a biscuit left on a stoop, a nod from a constable. Once, a child offered you a folded drawing of a lamppost. You kept it in your coat pocket for months, until the rain turned it into an abstract smear of joy. Some took things further. One lamplighter, famously, received a love letter from a woman who lived above his favorite lamp. She wrote that the way he lit it, slowly, tenderly, with a poetic flair of the taper, made her heart race. He was flattered and confused. He'd been picking a splinter out of his glove that night. Romance is weird like that. Then there was George, poor, bewildered George. He was arrested in 1878 for stealing flame. A term that sounds like it belongs in a fantasy novel, but was, apparently, a municipal offense. His crime: carrying a lit taper through town after hours without a permit. The charge was later downgraded to unauthorized ignition. He was fined a week's wages and immortalized in lamplighter lore. You see, people didn't understand how it all worked. To them, gaslight was magic. The city just glowed. The idea that a tired human being had to walk the entire route, lamp by lamp, lighting each one by hand, it didn't register. So when the system failed, they didn't blame the gasworks or the infrastructure. They blamed you, once. During a week-long fog so thick it made milk look transparent, every lighter fell behind. Lamps refused to catch. Tapers fizzled. The city was plunged into a dim, ghoulish half-light. Panic ensued. A group of citizens marched on the depot demanding answers. One man yelled, "What are we even paying you for?" A fair question if lamplighters were paid enough to eat meat more than once a week. But you didn't shout back. You stood there, soot-streaked and silent, and waited for the complaints to lose steam. They always did. Sometimes someone noticed. A shopkeeper left you a mug of tea. A nurse said thank you. A widow asked you to light an extra lamp near her stoop, just until my son returns. You weren't supposed to, but you did, because the job, for all its indignities, wasn't about praise. It was about presence, about showing up. Even when your boots were soaked, your fingers raw, and your face streaked with soot that never quite washed off, you were part of the street, a moving shadow, a flicker in the fog, an unsung note in the city's nightly rhythm. You weren't a hero, you weren't a villain, you were something in between, a fireproof scapegoat, and still, someone they'd miss if the lights went out. Let's kill a myth, shall we? Victorian gas lamps didn't make the streets safe. They made them visible, and that's not the same thing. Visibility, after all, cuts both ways. You can see and be seen. And for the more entrepreneurial criminals of the 19th century, a well-lit corner was less a deterrent and more a stage dot to a lamplighter. This was an open secret. You'd light a lamp, step back, and watch the gas flame bloom warm, golden, proud. Then you'd see it, a shadow twitching in a doorway, a figure adjusting their coat, a suspicious cough from behind a newsstand that hasn't sold a paper since 1842. Congratulations, you've just illuminated someone's office. You might think criminals would prefer darkness, but darkness is chaos. A good pickpocket, for instance, needs light. Just enough to see the purse, Not so much that the victim sees them. Too dark and you're fumbling, too bright and you're noticed. Gaslight was perfect. A flickering, romantic haze that offered cover and clarity in equal measure. Like candlelight at a confession, and the positioning, ideal. Lamps were placed at intersections, outside busy shops, near pubs, where the people were, which meant where the marks were. No self-respecting Victorian thief wanted to skulk in total darkness like a sewer ghoul. No, they wanted flair, timing, and a clear view of their victim's waistcoat buttons. Some even dressed to match the light, soft greys, muted browns, nothing too shiny. Lamp-compatible fashion. And if the mark protested, well, the lamp also made it easier to see who was protesting. And who WASN's single quotes. It got worse with organized gangs. The flash mob, no, not the dancing kind, operated with stunning coordination. One distracted, one bumped, one grabbed. All of them used the light as a compass. If you were near the brightest post on Bishopsgate, you were in the danger zone. It wasn't a coincidence. That particular lamp had just been replaced, stronger. Flame, cleaner glass. The thieves loved it. They could practically read fingerprints off a wallet. As a lamplighter, you started to notice these patterns. Same faces, same corners, same routine. You'd light a lamp, see two men waiting nearby, and mutter under your breath, "Third one's late." But what could you do? You weren't law enforcement. You weren't even allowed to carry a whistle. Your one defense was your pole, which was comically ineffective unless your attacker was a shy squirrel. Some lamplighters took it upon themselves to interfere. They'd light a lamp and then stand there, arms folded, just long enough to spook the crowd. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it earned you a brick to the ribs. Once, Gin Lizzie chased off a would-be mugger with a lit taper and the angriest expression this side of the Thames. Word got around. Lizzie's corner stayed crime-free for a month. Then there were the con artists. A well-lit street made for great theatrics. One man, known only as Lampstand Larry, used to wait near posts and pretend to be a constable. His uniform, a borrowed jacket and an air of disappointment. His scam, he'd fine you on the spot for loitering after dusk. People believed him. Why? Because he was near a lamp. The Victorian brain. He's under city lighting. He must be official. It worked until a real constable showed up and Larry tried to fine him. The resulting chase took out 3 baskets of apples and a full tray of eel pies. Even the lamps themselves weren't immune to crime. Vandals broke them. Gamblers leaned on them. Lovers scratched initials into the glass like it was a public diary. And of course, Archie and his band of delinquent philosophers took great joy in liberating the flame, extinguishing lamps mid-shift and turning quiet streets into blackout playgrounds. But the worst, the lookouts. Some gangs used lamplighters as timers. They knew your route. They watched your pace. They struck the moment you walked away from a post. In a way, you were their calendar, each lamp a ticking clock. Job starts at the 3rd. Light after long market. You were literally lighting their criminal itinerary. Did the city care? Hardly. They were too busy congratulating themselves on how modern and safe everything looked. Gaslight was considered a hallmark of progress, evidence that the city was finally dragging itself into something resembling civilization. Meanwhile, you're dodging a man in a bowler hat who may or may not be carrying a kosh. There's a certain irony in that, isn't there? You're the lamplighter, a beacon of order, predictability, structure, and yet the very thing you maintain becomes a tool for chaos. You're fighting the dark, only to discover that light itself has fangs, so you adapt. You walk faster. Keep your eyes sharp. Learn to sense trouble by scent alone. Tobacco, cheap cologne, sweat that smells like guilt. You develop instincts. Don't linger by the butcher's post. Avoid lamp number 49. The glass reflects just enough to blind you. And if you see two men pretending to argue near a bright corner, someone's purse is about to get lighter. But the job goes on, because the city demands light, no matter how dangerous it becomes. And you provide it, night after night, knowing full well that not everyone who walks in your glow deserves to be seen. You light the lamps, anyway, because someone has to. You'd be forgiven for thinking lampposts are boring, static, unremarkable, inanimate background characters. But in Victorian cities, they were alive with stories. Not literally, unless you count the occasional rat nest in the hollow base, but metaphorically, lampposts were the great eavesdroppers of the 19th century. And oh, the things they heard. Let's start with the gossip. Positioned conveniently at street corners, outside pubs, and just beyond church steps, lampposts were the Victorian equivalent of Twitter. People stood under them to whisper, flirt, argue, and occasionally propose marriage, often in the same 10-minute conversation. The gaslight gave a sort of dramatic backlighting to your scandal. It didn't matter if your corset was too tight and your boots were leaking. If you were bathed in that amber glow, you looked interesting. You sounded credible, and everyone spilled something. It could be tears, or secrets, or the contents of your stomach after too many gin slings. All of it happened under the lamps. Gin Lizzie once overheard a man confess to a theft, a priest admit he'd lost his faith, and a flower girl describe exactly what she thought of the Queen, all in one evening. The lamp, of course, just flickered silently through it all, a little gassy confessional booth with no priest to tell. Then there were the ghosts. Yes, ghosts. You think the Victorians would build a city of flickering shadows and not immediately invent the creepiest folklore imaginable? Please. These people were allergic to sunlight and addicted to seances. Every lamplighter had their haunted post. The one you lit a little faster. The one where the flame took longer to catch. As if the gas was ... resisting. Archie swore post number 92 on Milk Lane was haunted by a former lamplighter who'd slipped on a frozen cobblestone and impaled himself on his own pole. Honestly, statistically plausible. They said if you passed that lamp at just the right hour, you'd hear a faint tap-tap, the sound of someone still trying to light it. Gin Lizzie, of course, lit it with one hand and muttered, "He can help if he wants." But supernatural or not, the lamps developed reputations. Some posts were known for arguments, the divorce post. Some were for secret lovers, the kissing post. One was even considered good luck if you touched it before payday, though frankly it probably just had fewer rats. Others were infamous for their unpredictability. Remember, these were gas lamps. Gas, as in flammable, unpredictable, occasionally explosive. A leak in the underground pipe system could turn a flicker into a flare-up in seconds. It wasn't unheard of for a lamp to just go WHUMP, sending nearby pigeons into therapy and singeing the mustache off an unlucky pedestrian dot. And did anyone fix it quickly? Of course not. You'd file a report, and the city would send a man named Clive 3 weeks later, armed with nothing but a wrench, a flask, and a deeply unconvincing whistle. In the meantime, you'd just avoid that post, especially if your coat was wool. Some lamps hissed, others sputtered. A few dripped something that may have been gas, or tar, or despair. But they were part of the neighborhood. Locals gave directions. Using lampposts, turn left at the one that buzzes right, at the one with the lovebirds carved in. Over time, they became characters in their own right. Poets wrote about them. Artists painted them. Children dared each other to kiss them. And when one broke, really broke, people mourned. There are stories of entire neighborhoods holding a sort of vigil when their favorite lamp was finally replaced with a newer, sleeker model, which of course everyone immediately hated. Too bright, no soul, it doesn't flicker, right? The lamplighters knew all this. Some even played into it. Archie had a habit of tipping his cap to certain posts, as if they were co-workers. Lizzie liked to pretend she was giving them medical checkups. Let's see if your flame's wheezy today. You might think that sounds silly, but when you spend years lighting the same 200 lamps, they become yours. Your route, your glow, your secrets and secrets they had. A well-placed lamp could witness anything, from casual pickpocketing to passionate goodbyes. One post on Clapham Road was known for marking the final sighting of a young woman who vanished without a trace. No one ever solved it. The lamp, naturally, offered no comment. It's the quiet dignity of lampposts that makes them feel haunted, even when they're not. They see but don't speak. They shine but don't judge. They outlast almost everyone who ever touched them. Let that sink in. The hand that installed it, gone. The lamplighter who climbed it, gone. The lovers who stood under it, swore under it, kissed under it, all gone. But the lamp remains, slightly rusted, slightly leaning, but still glowing, still bearing witness. So the next time you pass an old lamppost in a foggy alley, don't laugh. Don't rush, just pause. Because someone once stood exactly where you're standing, a century ago, heart pounding, secrets churning, breathing the same coal thick air dot, and the lamp saw it all, and it's still here, watching, being a lamplighter. Might sound noble, gently illuminating your foggy corner of Victorian society, like a soot-streaked guardian angel. But let's be real, most nights, you weren't lighting the way for poets and pensioners. You were lighting the way for pickpockets, grave robbers, and drunkards in increasingly complicated hats. Victorian crime had a certain flavor. It wasn't always violent, though it could be, but it was always grimy, petty theft, and scandalous. Mischief ruled the shadows. And guess what the criminals loved more than anything? Visibility. You thought lamplight deterred them. Oh no. It was mood lighting. Picture this. You light a lamp on an alley corner, step back to admire your work, and 5 seconds later, a man in a tattered bowler hat slinks into the pool of light, gently relieving a distracted drunk of his pocket watch. He bows to you as he leaves. You nod back. Occupational hazard. And you saw everything. You saw Martha Twofingers, Whitcomb, lift a wallet clean out of a solicitor's waistcoat while pretending to sell violets. You saw tiny Alf sneak into a butcher's shop and exit 5 minutes later with an entire piglet under his coat. You didn't say a word. What could you do? You were holding a 10-foot pole and making minimum wage in soot. Some crimes were opportunistic. Others were organized. The kind of things that gave Scotland Yard headaches and made newspaper editors giddy. There were gangs, of course. You had the 40 Elephants, a brutal all-female shoplifting crew that operated with military precision. You had the Scuttlers, known for knives, fistfights, and theatrical facial hair. And then there were the Mudlark Mafias, kids who scoured the Thames by day and slipped through back alleys by night. often lit by your very hand. There was a pecking order to it all. The high-class criminals worked in sleight of hand and elegant deception, card sharps, conmen, thieves in velvet gloves. The low-class ones, they worked with clubs, grease, and desperation. And there you were, the neutral party in the middle, casting light on both. You weren't a cop, you weren't a witness. You were more like a silent extra in the background of someone else's crime drama, lighting but never starring. And then there were the truly weird ones, like the man who stole only gloves. Hundreds of gloves, left hands only. The police never found him, but your friend Danny swore he once saw the man vanish down an alley at twilight, tossing a lavender-scented glove in the air like a magician's calling card. Or the mystery of the urinal thief. Not content with just petty theft, this nighttime menace stole the entire Castian urinal from behind a tavern near Camden. No one heard a thing. One day it was there, the next nothing but bolts and a faint whiff of mischief. You may think, well, surely the lamps helped stop some of this, right? And in theory, yes. But Victorian cities were like open-air theatres for crime, and your job was to literally set the stage. Even worse, you were predictable. Criminals knew your route. They knew what time each lamp came alive, and they used that rhythm like clockwork. Archie used to joke, they ought to pay us overtime. We're practically working logistics for the criminal underground. And sometimes, you weren't lighting for strangers. Sometimes it was your cousin, your neighbor, your childhood friend, sneaking down a side street with a mysterious parcel and a face full of regret. You didn't always ask questions. You just turned away, because not every criminal wore a mask. Sometimes it was the butcher's apprentice, who owed the wrong people money. Sometimes it was a laundress who stole a dress to impress a suitor. And sometimes it was a hungry child taking a loaf of bread, and in the dark glow of the gas lamp, crime didn't always look like evil. Sometimes it just looked like survival. Let that sink in. Still, there were moments when even you felt the chill of fear. A scream down the alley, the sight of a blade catching the light, a sudden rush of feet behind you, and you standing there, with your pole, your matches, your job frozen. There was a name that made everyone nervous. Jack, even years after the murders stopped. Jack lingered like fog. Every lamplighter had a moment where their flame flickered and their gut clenched. Was that a shadow? A trick of the mist? Or something worse? The lamps couldn't protect you. They only revealed, and sometimes that was the scariest part. But you kept lighting anyway, one post after another, because without you, the dark would take over completely. And if that happened, if every gas lamp stayed cold and silent, what would be left? A city of shadows, a silence full of teeth. So you walked, and you lit, and you watched the thieves and ghosts and strangers in the fog. Not because you were brave, but because someone had to. Let's talk about something less visible than gaslight, but just as heavy: the silence. The fog in Victorian London wasn't just physical, it was psychological. It crept into lungs and minds alike. And for a lantern lighter, walking alone for hours in streets that looked like ghost corridors, the quiet could become ... oppressive. No one tells you this when you sign up to poke fire at iron poles. It's lonely work. You walk for hours, in mist, in rain, in sleet that crunches like bone shards under your boots. You pass houses with glowing windows, laughter tucked safely inside. But you're out here murmuring to flame, whispering to shadows. No one greets you unless they need a light. And even then, it's transactional, not connection, just combustion. The city is loud in the day. Carriages, shouting, vendors, clatter and chaos. But at night, it hushes. You'd think that would be peaceful, romantic even. It's not. It's like the whole city is holding its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. And when you walk, that inky silence, it doesn't take long before your thoughts turn inward. Some lighters coped with song. You'd hear a voice from 5 lamps down, a half-drunk rendition of My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, echoing off brick. Others talked to themselves. Some talked to the lamps. Archie swore his 3rd post on Bramble Street was haunted and always whispered back. But most of us just stayed quiet. Let the silence fill us up like smoke in a lung. Loneliness in the Victorian era wasn't treated. It wasn't diagnosed. It was called melancholia, or worse, dismissed as a weak spirit. You couldn't exactly file a complaint saying, "My job is turning me into a walking shadow." No one cared. You were still expected to light up, so we carried it. Some of us drank heavily. It wasn't uncommon to see a lamplighter take a nip between poles, just to blur the edges of the fog. Others found solace in odd rituals, lighting the posts in a certain rhythm, counting the seconds before the hiss of ignition, pretending the flame was talking back. And yes, some broke under it. There were stories of lamplighters who vanished, just left their roots one night and kept walking into the mist. No one looked too hard. It was London. People disappeared all the time. But behind the sarcasm and grime, there's a truth that still stings. No one asked how you were, because mental health wasn't real to most Victorians. Not in the way we understand it now. If you were sad, you were weak. If you were nervous, you were hysterical. And if you were overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of lighting fire for a city that never looked up, well, you'd better keep it to yourself. And this loneliness wasn't just occupational. It was social. Most lamplighters were poor, unmarried, rootless. You moved often, slept in crammed tenements, woke before dawn. You didn't build bonds easily. And even when you did, maybe with another lighter, or the occasional friendly milkmaid, the job wore it down. The fog got in between people, made them vague, blurry, easy to forget. Still, there were moments of kindness, fleeting things, a child peeking from a window and waving, an old man tipping his hat, a baker slipping you a crust of bread, saying you're the reason I don't fall in the gutter. It helped, but it didn't fix it. Let that sink in. You were essential to the city's function, and invisible to its soul. Modern parallels, oh, they're everywhere. Think about the delivery driver who leaves your food at the door, the janitor who cleans the office after hours, the night nurse, the barback, all vital, all largely ignored, and often all lonely. We still haven't solved it, this epidemic of useful invisibility. So what happens when the fog seeps in for a good? Some lantern lighters retired quietly. Some died young, and a few, the ones who couldn't bear the silence any longer, left behind journals, scrawled notes, half-burnt poems. One read, "I light a world that never sees me. When I go out, no one notices. I am a flicker. I am gone." You can still find that note in the archives of the London Gaslight and Coke Company, tucked in a box marked Miscellaneous Debris. Because even in death, that lighter was sorted, filed, and forgotten. But not by us. Not tonight, because now you're walking their route, you're carrying their pole, and for just a moment, In the glow of this story, they're visible again. So yeah, breathe that in, soot, silence, and all still with us. Then you know what to do. Like, subscribe, tap that bell. It helps keep this little flame going, and maybe makes the fog a bit less lonely. So, let's get one thing straight. Victorian lantern lighters were quiet, but they weren't pushovers. Just because you spent your nights igniting iron posts in wet wool and swallowing fog didn't mean you lacked opinions. And eventually, those opinions got loud. Loud enough to rattle gas companies, city councils, and even the newspapers. Welcome to the part they don't teach you in polite history. Class, the great lamplighter labor rumblings. Picture it. The late 1870s. Gas companies were making record profits. Shareholders were sipping port in mahogany parlors, while the lighters were out here losing fingers to frostbite. And what did management decide to do? Cut wages. Naturally, because who needs all 10 fingers to light a city anyway? The lighters didn't just mumble and move on. They organized. Enter the Brotherhood of Gas Workers, a scrappy, largely ignored coalition of night workers who realized, hey, maybe the people who keep London from stumbling into horse dung every evening deserve a living wage. It started with whispered meetings in pub basements, fueled by overboiled ale and righteous rage. Lighters from different routes compared notes, literally. Pay stubs, injury reports, lost hours. One even brought in the stub of his burnt-out pole and slammed it on the bar top, declaring, "That's what they gave me instead of boots." And just like that, the spark was lit. They began staging slow lightings, deliberately pacing their routes to delay the city's glow. Some lighters skipped every third lamp. Others swapped routes and confused the entire neighborhood. The newspapers noticed. London dims in protest. Read one headline. Evening streets like tombs. Q Gas Company, panic. Because here's the twist. The lantern lighters had power. Not political power, not legal power, but the kind that comes from being invisible until something stops working. Suddenly, the city noticed. Women refused to walk alone. Pickpockets rejoiced. Shopkeepers lit candles in protest. There were actual editorials titled, "Bring Back the Glow." And the companies, oh, they blinked. Negotiations began. The lighters didn't ask for much. A penny more per post. Better boots. A uniform that didn't rot after one winter. Maybe even gasp gloves. Some demands were met. Most weren't, but the lighters kept going. Quiet rebellions. Passive resistance. A lamp accidentally left unlit outside the manager's home. A bent key that mysteriously failed on the mayor's route. And you know what? It worked. Bit by bit, the job changed. Not a revolution, no, but enough to make things survivable. And yet, most history books never mention this, because lighters weren't glamorous. They weren't generals or politicians, just men with poles and flame, striking not just sparks, but a little bit of fear into the system. Want to know something weird? This story echoes today. Ever seen delivery drivers strike? Or gig workers protest algorithm changes? That's modern lamplighting. Same invisibility, same slow burn, same moment where people realize, hey, I am the infrastructure. Because when enough people who keep the lights on decide to stop, even for a night, the world takes notice. Here's a name we should remember. Thomas Briggs, a lantern lighter who testified before Parliament in 1884. He said, "We work in the dark so others may feel safe." that should not come with hunger or frostbite. His quote didn't make headlines, but it made ripples. And eventually, better coats. Let that sink in. A man with soot in his teeth and blisters on his hands went toe-to-toe with lawmakers. And he did it with words, not fire. The rebellion wasn't cinematic. It didn't end with banners or fireworks. It ended with quieter nights, slightly warmer boots, a flicker of dignity. So the next time you hear about some unskilled worker causing delays, remember the men with the poles, the ones who knew the city wouldn't shine without them, and finally made the city see it too. And maybe, just maybe, we could learn from them, that even the smallest flame, held high enough, can change the way people walk through the dark. Let that settle in your chest like a glow, because the rebellion was never loud. It was steady, and that's how the night began to change. You've survived frostbite, fog, and underpaid labor uprisings. You've waved your flame across a city of millions. You've dodged soot, soothed widows, slipped across icy cobbles, and learned how to keep your humanity stitched together with lamp oil and resolve. And then boom, Edison happens. The light bulb arrives, and suddenly your entire existence is obsolete. Not just the tools in your hands, but the hands themselves. The lantern lighter, a job forged in smoke and sorrow, is now deemed inefficient. What a word, so sterile, so modern, so final. It all started with one lamp, a prototype, on Holborn Viaduct, installed by the newly formed electric board. A quiet little bulb glowing white and pure, like some smug angel among the gas-breathing gargoyles. No hiss, no flicker, just a silent, radiant glow. The people gathered to stare. Some applauded, some whispered. You, the lighter, stood in the back, holding your pole like a relic, like a joke nobody explained to you. And then came the rollout. Street by street, the posts began to change. No longer iron tulips, needing your fire. Now they were modern. Monoliths, sealed and humming and utterly indifferent to human touch. At first it was slow, like watching moss creep up your gravestone. The city couldn't afford a full conversion, so for a while you still had work, but you could feel it. The inevitable crawl of progress, dragging your job behind it like a withered overcoat. Let's take a breath here, because what we're talking about isn't just technology, it's erasure. Imagine being told, the world doesn't need your touch anymore. Not your careful lighting pattern, not your knowledge of which lamps sputter in the rain, not your ghost-like patrols that made a city safer than it knew. Now, a switch in a room does what you did, faster, cleaner, and without the tea breaks. And it's not just your job, of course. The milkmen would soon fall. So would the knocker-uppers, the rat-catchers, the bone-pickers, the coal-shoveling boys. All replaced, all forgotten, no plaque, no ceremony. Just a letter from the gas board that read, "Your services are no longer required." Let that settle, because behind every invention we celebrate, there's a job it quietly killed. Did the electric revolution save lives? Absolutely. Did it make cities cleaner, safer, brighter? Without question. But was it a mercy for the men who had built their entire identities on lanterns? Not even close. Many lighters couldn't pivot. Where would you go with a resume that says knows every alley in East London, can light 40 lamps? An hour excels at not dying in fog. HR departments weren't hiring for that. Some retrained as factory hands. Others became errand boys for electric companies. The very things that gutted their trade. A few drifted into obscurity, lighting candles in churchyards and muttering to themselves about the old days. One lighter, named Alfred Newcomb, reportedly spent his final working years pretending to light already electric lamps just to maintain a routine. He'd strike his flint, tip his hat to no one, and move on to the next post. Londoners would smile politely. Children called him Ghost Flame. He died in 1903, alone in a rented room, with his brass pole leaning by the door like a fading memory. And the city, it just got brighter. Progress has no nostalgia clause. Let's not paint this with a brush of total despair. The electric era did bring beauty, neon art, cinemas, nightlife, the ability to read without risking your curtains catching fire. It gave us a world where the night wasn't something to fear, but to explore. But that doesn't mean the men of the flame weren't worth remembering, because they were part of the story, the hinge between darkness and light. And isn't it strange that we owe the modern glow to hands that were eventually cast into shadow? So the next time you see a street lamp flicker, imagine a man in a soot-smudged coat tapping it gently with a brass pole, humming a tune that nobody hears anymore. He's not angry, he's not bitter, but maybe, just maybe, he wants you to remember, just once, that someone had to light it first, still watching. Then you know what to do. Subscribe, drop a like, or pass this story on to someone who's ever felt their job slowly vanish under the heel of innovation. So here we are. The lantern is out. The streets glow with cold, electric clarity. The fog is pierced by sodium vapor, not flame. And the man with the pole vanished. But is he? Let's step back for a second. Because while the gaslights may be gone and the job officially retired, something lingers. Something softer, less practical, but far more human. Legacy, not the kind carved on plaques or remembered in textbooks. Those usually go to kings, inventors, and politicians who had the good luck of dying with clean hands. No, this is the quieter kind. The kind that glows dimly in the cultural back alleys, in children's books, in paintings of misty alleyways, in stories passed down by someone's grandfather who claimed he saw the last of the real lamplighters. And that matters, because, despite everything, the soot, the aching joints, the invisibility, there's something oddly noble about the job. Think about it. Your entire profession revolved around making other people feel safe. You walked in darkness so others didn't have to. You did it in silence. No applause, no medals, just the hiss of a lamp and the flicker of a flame. And in that moment, that single glowing orb, the world was made a little less terrifying. We romanticize knights and cowboys and explorers, but what about the men who kept the monsters of the night at bay with nothing but a pole and a flame? You were the caretakers of dusk, the custodians of evening, in an age before bedtime routines included apps, sound machines, and ASMR videos. Your steady footsteps and predictable glow were what lulled people to sleep. You were the sleep playlist of the 19th century, only with more frostbite and fewer ad deals. Sure, no one builds monuments to people who just kept things working. But maybe they should, because the world doesn't run on grand gestures. It runs on 1,000 tiny kindnesses. A lamp lit here, a path made safe there, a face familiar in the fog. And when we look at our own lives, especially in today's hyper-digital, fast everything, always on world, doesn't part of us still crave that flicker of human presence? It's why vintage street lamps still make us pause. Why certain alleyways in cities like Prague, Edinburgh, and even London feel oddly alive at night, like they're waiting for someone in a soot coat to tap the lamp and whisper, "Sleep well, stranger." Even today, in a few corners of the world, ceremonial lamplighters still exist. Places like Zagreb and Wroclaw keep a few on staff, not because they need them, but because they understand something the rest of us forgot, that ritual matters, that presence matters, that even in an age of automation, people still find comfort in the old ways, in a flame, not just a filament. And if you're still awake, which honestly you shouldn't be, ask yourself this: what are your lanterns? What are the small, invisible tasks you do every day that no one thanks you for? What parts of your life are spent lighting the way for others, quietly, without recognition? You may not walk cobbled streets with a brass pole, but maybe you leave the porch light on. Maybe you check in on a neighbor. Maybe you send texts that say, "Just thinking of you," or keep doing the dishes even when no one notices. Those are lanterns. 2. The job may be gone, but the spirit, the essence of the lantern lighter still burns. It burns in nurses during night shifts, in security guards pacing empty halls, in parents soothing nightmares at 3 a.m., in baristas who open shop before sunrise, in all the people who carry flame, metaphorically or literally, so that others can move through the dark a little more safely. You, dear viewer, are probably one of them. And maybe that's why you're here, on a sleepy YouTube video about a forgotten Victorian job, told with sarcasm and soot and oddly poetic metaphors, because part of you knows that history isn't just made by generals and geniuses. It's also made by people who lit things, cleaned things, watched things, quietly, reliably, and with just enough care to keep the world from falling apart. So as the credits roll, metaphorically anyway, picture one last scene: a man in a long coat, leaning against a fog-wrapped lamppost. He holds a brass pole in one hand and a small tin lantern in the other. His face is tired, but content. He lights the final lamp of the night. Then he turns, and before he disappears into the alley, he gives you a knowing nod. You saw him, you remembered, and somewhere that means the flame still burns. So next time you flip a light switch, spare a thought for the soot-covered souls who walk through fog to give you fire. If you laughed, winced, or learned something mildly haunting tonight, subscribe, like, or whisper thanks to the nearest lamp post we're listening.